Well, our AutoPen story just keeps progressing. It's not going anywhere, Joe Biden, because a majority of voters suspect that Joe Biden's White House staffers used the AutoPen device without his permission. And nearly half agree with President Donald Trump's declaration that Biden's pardons are illegitimate. That's not us saying it. That's according to a new Rasmussen report survey of over 1,000 likely voters. Now, Rasmussen asked them this question, or told them this statement: many of the pardons issued under President Biden were signed by a machine called an AutoPen. President Trump has declared that these pardons are null and void. Do you agree or disagree with Trump nullifying Biden's pardons? 34% strongly agreed, 15% somewhat agreed, making that number. And join us now to discuss this more in depth is the head pollster for Rasmussen Reports, Mark Mitchell. Mark, I don't think you even knew this was like our story. I'd broken this last July. It kept progressing. Our own White House correspondent, Kara Castronova, asked Caroline Levitt about it 2 weeks ago in the briefing room, prompting Donald Trump talking about it. So now, like, this whole lid has been blown off, and you're asking voters how they feel about it. They don't trust the AutoPen either, huh? It sounds like.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Well, they don't trust Biden. That's basically what we've taken away from the last couple of years. But yeah, congratulations, hat tip, excellent story. And I'll tell you, there was about a 3-month chunk of my life that was all a blur, and I kind of forget it. And so this kind of fell into that period. So I hope I can be excused, because of the election. But yeah, this is, Joe Biden was a horrible president. Everybody hates him, and that's why Donald Trump won. It was the overreach, the oppression, the absolute ridiculous clown world stuff that happened, and we have poll after poll after poll that showed that, because the voters were paying attention. While they were being gaslit the entire time, like even back in the beginning of 2022, and I think actually late 2021, we had a strong majority of voters saying that they weren't confident in Joe Biden's physical or mental capacity in order to do the job of president, and 68% wanted him to have a mental or cognitive test. So that's the guy, right? And now you have a big plurality of voters agreeing that with Trump that the pardon is they're no good, and only 40% disagreeing. And only, 62% of Democrats disagree, and Republicans. This is Trump's party, man. These Republicans are following along with everything Trump. They totally agree with him. 56% of Republicans strongly agree, another 20% somewhat. That's 76%, and even a plurality of independents. So it's like Trump comes out and says this stuff. The mainstream media still to this day will clutch pearls and talk about dictator Trump and all the stuff he's doing to destroy the Constitution. But voters get what's going on, and they're happy now. We have right direction, the highest it's ever been the last couple of weeks. We got it up to 48%, the highest in 19 years of Rasmussen polling. So they can argue all they want about Trump's approval or all the things that he's doing that are potentially a constitutional crisis. Voters are happier than they've been in a long time. And it's because he's down there taking a wrecking ball to the government.
Exactly. And I think that here's why your survey is so important as well, getting back to the current survey on the AutoPen, is that it sounds like to me that Donald Trump is actually going to consider those preemptive pardons, which people question the constitutionality or the legality of preemptive pardons anyway, right? There was like, how does this even work? When we're looking at Dr. Fauci and some of these other people, a preemptive pardon. But now you have to question the validity of them based on the signature. And if Donald Trump is moving forward on questioning them because of the signature, based on your polling, especially that second question, how likely is it that when Joe Biden was president, members of his White House staff used AutoPen to sign documents without Biden's knowledge or approval? When you paired the somewhat likely and the very likely and somewhat likely, 54% of people overall believed, right, that staff used his AutoPen without his knowledge. So he didn't even know this document was being signed. And when you put those who don't think that really happened, that was only 35% of people would say, well, I don't believe people really signed it without his knowledge. Only 35%. So that tells me that public sentiment is on Donald Trump's side if he does choose to consider these pardons, truly considers them illegitimate, and his administration perhaps pursues investigations into some of these people who were given the pardons, that he's going to be okay with the public if he decides to do so.
Yeah, I think so. There are a lot of bipartisan gimmies, like 80% issues that if you wanted to do them as Congress or Trump, you should do them right away, like voter ID, like auditing our elections, those kind of things. But the vast majority of other things now is the new signal is like 55% to roughly 35%. Donald Trump won by just about 1% or 2% in the national popular vote. But what happened since then is a lot of Democrats have capitulated. A lot of independents have woken up to the amount of fraud in the government. And so this is one of those things where it's like Trump's never going to get 60, 70% position on some of these highly partisan things. But here you go, 54% to 35%. People think that, Joe Biden's his team was in there just pardoning people left and right without his knowledge. And this is just in line with another 55 to 35 question we had was like, should Democrats use every fiber of their being to resist Trump, or should they work with him? And 55% say work with him. And so, again, this shows what a horrible position the Democrats are in because they're taking that 35% position. They're still saying, oh, no, Biden was totally fine. And, oh, no, we can't have mass deportations. Oh, no, we need to resist Trump. And so they're in this like death spiral now because things have massively changed just in the last couple months, and they haven't pivoted at all.
That's really interesting, Mark. I didn't know that because I'll be honest, I haven't been looking at as much polling since the start of the administration other than maybe his favorability. But that's interesting. You say there's a new signal trend where there's about the 55% to 35. That's a shift. And that's what we look for, right? We look for signals, shifts, and trends. So that's an interesting indicator you just highlighted there.
Yeah, we've been covering this on our show. I think what we're seeing is the kind of massive public opinion shift that goes along with the fourth turning. Basically, we're at the end of the fourth turning. Maybe the crisis is a war, maybe it's not, but there's going to be a crisis that realigns everybody into shared, cultural values and stronger institutions and more leadership and objectivity. And what we've been seeing is that the young people, as expected, are leading that right now. 18 to 39-year-olds 2 weeks ago had a 60% Trump approval. They have a higher right direction, wrong track than anybody else by like double digits. And that is brand new, like in the last month or two. And I think they are the ones on Twitter right now and online and on YouTube watching people blow open what the level of fraud, waste, and abuse in the government. Because let's be frank, Republicans and Democrats colluded together to steal their future. And so this is a massive change, and the Democrats are just totally out in left field on this. They can't allow themselves to at all recognize the things that are being uncovered, and because of that, their crazies are taking over. And AOC and Bernie are not going to save the party. There's no way.
No, I think you're right. And you highlight that line, waste, fraud, and abuse. And we heard that said over and over and over and over, that phrase in the cabinet meeting earlier today with Donald Trump and his cabinet. Thank you so much, Mark Mitchell. And as he said, they do have a show now, Rasmussen Reports does, where they go in depth in all of this. And of course, you can always catch them on X and on their website for their in-depth polling. And we appreciate what you do. And it's good to see you again. It's been too long. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, good to see you too. This is going to be a pretty fun year, I think. So maybe we'll do it more often.
And nothing less than, I guess you could say, an eye-opening turn of events. The Atlantic's left-wing reporter, Jeffrey Goldberg, details how he was accidentally included on a sensitive signal app chain involving key Trump national security advisors. Here's how Goldberg described it. He wrote, quote, on Tuesday, March 11th, I received a connection request on Signal from a user identified as Michael Waltz. And I assumed that the Michael Waltz in questions was President Donald Trump's national security advisor. I did not assume, however, that the request was from the actual Michael Waltz. It immediately crossed my mind that someone could be masquerading as Waltz in order to somehow entrap me. After detailing how he was included in multiple in-depth exchanges between Trump's team on war plans for Yemen, Goldberg asked the White House National Security Council spokesman, Brian Hughes, if the signal message chain was actually real. According to Hughes, who's reached out to me in the past, quote, this appears to be an authentic message chain, and we are reviewing how an inadvertent number was added to the chain. As if that wasn't embarrassing enough, Hughes then added, this detail, saying, quote, "This thread is a demonstration of the deep and thoughtful policy coordination between senior officials. The ongoing success of the Houthi operation demonstrates that there were no threats to troops or national security." Now, to be clear, that thread was a reminder of how the Trump team still hasn't learned their lesson, okay? Forget about the fact that the operational security was willfully ignored by using the Signal messaging app to have these sensitive discussions, which is a greater problem, okay? But the biggest problem, why, is Jeffrey Goldberg or any left-wing member of the corporate press being asked to participate in any meeting or conduct any interview with any senior Trump officials. Has Donald Trump and his team learned nothing when it comes to dealing with a hostile corporate press? This recent incident with Jeffrey Goldberg should be a hard lesson for Trump's team. Why is it that they continue giving leftists who hate Donald Trump and his MAGA movement any time at all, when there are far friendlier networks or just unbiased, okay, in the new media that would have never thrown Trump or his team under the bus like Goldberg and Maggie Haberman of the New York Times so often do? I just hope that eventually the Trump team learns one day that they need to block and ignore all members of the fake propagandist corporate press before it's too late. And that's the absolute truth. You, my friend, need Native Path collagen, made with only type 1 and type 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen in your body. It's found in cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, your gut. Type 1 and 3 provide maximum benefits without the need for unnecessary fillers. Also, Native Path collagen has no additives, no artificial sweeteners. It's also completely flavorless, which is important because Native Path collagen can be added to anything. I put it in my coffee. Also, because of its special peptide formulation, it mixes more easily than any other collagen I've ever tried, and I've tried a lot. But the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals. You can get 3 or 6 packs at a fraction of the price of other brands. Plus, they have a 365-day no-risk guarantee, making Native Path the trusted choice. All you have to do is visit getnativepath.com/truth. That's getnativepath.com/truth to start your transformation. The United States is working its way through a proposed ceasefire in the Ukraine war, negotiating separately in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, with members of the Ukrainian diplomatic corps and the Russian diplomatic corps. Indeed, the American side is advocating for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, specifically in the critical international waterway of the Black Sea. But Ukraine is lobbing a new round of accusations at the Russian side as these talks progress. Notably, they claim that the Russians bombed a hospital in Kiev, and President Zelensky is accusing Russia of having initiated a new round of cyber attacks directed against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. Are these accusations accurate, or are they simply the last-ditch attempts of a desperate leader who wants to badly continue waging a losing war against Russia? Joining us now to highlight these facts is none other than our friend, the Moscow-based journalist Dimitri Simes Jr. He's the host of the New Rules Geopolitics podcast. Dimitri, it's good to see you. A lot has happened since last we spoke.
Yes, I'm reminded of Lenin, who, by the way, I don't approve of, but he had one good quote where he said, there are certain decades where nothing happens and certain weeks where decades happen. At this point, we're, in certain hours or days where decades happen.
Yeah, especially in the Ukraine conflict. Last week, we thought we'd had, perhaps the makings for at least an initial, not ceasefire, but maybe a de-escalation with promises of not attacking energy infrastructure on both sides. That didn't happen. Pretty much 24 hours after Vladimir Zelensky's call with President Trump, things seem to have escalated a bit. Now there are talks in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. What is your perception of how the talks are going?
Well, you alluded to the fact that this ceasefire initiative was violated. And just to remind our viewers, President Donald Trump proposed that Russia and Ukraine refrain from attacking each other's energy infrastructure for 30 days. President Putin immediately agreed, called the head of the Russian General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, And the Russians even shot drones which were in mid-flight and which were supposed to be hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure. By contrast, ever since this new ceasefire initiative, Ukraine has attacked Russian energy infrastructure multiple times in multiple different regions. And so this raises the obvious question on Russia's part. Why is Zelensky doing this? And the overall reason why he's doing this from Russia's perspective is that he doesn't actually want peace. Zelensky doesn't want peace. He doesn't want to stop Ukrainians from dying. And maybe some of your viewers saw a big, Time magazine interview that came out with Zelensky earlier today. And there was this one really curious photo where Zelensky is glamorously posing next to two paintings. One of these paintings show Moscow's Red Square on fire, and the other shows Ukrainian soldiers storming constitutional Russian territory, i.e. Kursk. And so what I think is important for your viewers to understand is that Ukraine is not just not a Western democracy. It's not a normal, functional, rational country. It is a country whose entire national identity is based around hating Russia and Russians. And so if we want to make this peace process work, I think that one of the key questions that President Trump is going to have to ask, how far is he willing to go to pressure Zelensky? What sort of specific leverage can he use against Zelensky to keep him on the tight leash? Because as I've repeatedly said, people in Moscow respect President Trump. They believe that he has good intentions. People are very impressed by Steve Witkoff because they say that he's showing himself as a very savvy and knowledgeable negotiator. But we don't trust Zelensky and we don't trust the Ukrainians because the Ukrainians have repeatedly lied. They have repeatedly violated all agreements that they have ever signed. And so, if we were just talking about the Americans aspect of things, we're cautiously optimistic. But if we're talking about the Ukrainian side of things, Russia is very pessimistic because we know these people well and they've never been good news.
Well, and that's basically what the Ukrainians say about Russia. We had a Ukrainian member of parliament named Halina Yanchenko on the show last week, where she suggested it was actually Russia who had violated the ceasefire, the agreement to stop attacking energy infrastructure. We also played for her your comments, Dmitry, from last week when you were last on the show on the prerequisite for peace being the cessation of sales from the U.S. to Ukraine of arms, right? This was her response to what you said. Listen. So basically, Zelensky's asking for more, munitions. Trump has agreed. Russia's saying that's a non-starter. So how do we move past this? How do we move past this impasse to get some kind of peace resolution?
It's odd things to hear that Russia is afraid of Ukraine to be prepared for another war. It's Russia who've been the most aggressive country on this continent. It's Russia who keeps occupying independent nations. So everyone should be concerned of Russia and Russia's capacity to actually keep occupying other independent countries.
Your response, Dmitry?
Well, the first thing I would note that Russia has a good relationship with an overwhelming majority of its neighbors, including countries that were part of the Soviet Union and countries that pursue good relations with the West. So this sort of premise that Russia is this sort of unhinged, aggressive imperialist state, the record doesn't bore that out. We have a good relationship with the overwhelming majority of our neighbors. The reason we have a bad relationship with Ukraine is because A, they have a Russophobic regime that glorifies neo-Nazi collaborators and that slaughters ethnic Russians en masse. The other reason we have a bad relationship with Ukraine is because they literally wanted to post NATO bases and NATO weapons on their territory against Russia. So again, Ukrainians like to pretend being victims, but let's look at the actual facts. There was an opportunity to end this war, prevent it from ever happening back in 2014, 2015, when the people of the Donbass peacefully protested against the color revolution in Ukraine. How did the Ukrainian regime respond? They responded by burning people alive. They responded by sending tanks against unarmed civilians. And they responded by kidnapping people, men, women, children, priests, locking them up in torture chambers without due process, and doing medieval style torture against them. And so when the Ukrainians say that, Vladimir Putin just woke up on the wrong side of the bed and decided to attack Ukraine for no reason, this is absolutely disinformation. The reason Vladimir Putin ended up sending troops into Ukraine is because he tried over the span of 8 years from 2014 to 2022 to resolve the conflict in the Donbass peacefully through negotiations. And Vladimir Putin turned a blind eye to Ukraine's numerous violations of the Minsk peace process. The Ukrainians repeatedly shelled the Donbass. They repeatedly assassinated top Donbass leaders. They, continued to kidnap people on Donbass territories, and they didn't fulfill any of the obligations on their end. And towards the end, they openly said that they had no intention of fulfilling their obligations. So what I would say is that Vladimir Putin is an incredibly patient man, but the Ukrainians are so fanatical, so inflexible, and so stubborn that they made Putin, who is a naturally conservative, cautious politician, make the decision to resolve this militarily.
Well, what I would say is that it does appear that Zelensky takes a lot of cues from Western countries. And it doesn't appear that the Western countries at the time, say in 2022, when there was the last peace talks, had any incentive or wanted Zelensky or incentivized him in any way to go to those peace talks. In fact, they tried to get him from, keep the war going. And it seems like that's still going on. It has been hard to get a lot of real reporting from the front lines and to see what's really going on. I know that's something that you've been focused on your New Rules podcast. As an example, just lately, you had a new interview with a Russian commander of a mechanized infantry unit on the front lines of the Ukraine war. Tell us about that.
Well, this commander has a very unique perspective because first he served as a member of an assault unit, but later he became a reconnaissance commander of a motorized rifle platoon. And as a result, he had an opportunity to take part in the battle for the Donbass in 2022. He personally took a leading role in helping defeat the failed Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023. And he was in Kursk region in 2024. So he really had a rich experience with the conflict, and he saw how much the Russian military changed over time. And one of the things I asked him is, there's a lot of people in Washington, D.C., neocons like Senator Lindsey Graham, who say that the Ukrainians have succeeded in bleeding Russia dry and that the Russian military is a shell of its former self. He said that this could not be further from the truth. On the contrary, he said that this conflict has made the Russian military not just more progressive and modern, but more democratic. The Russian military is now more open to new ideas because they realize that the nature of warfare is changing. And the only way that they can succeed on the battlefield is by bringing in outsider opinion. People from like IT specialists, drone specialists, communication specialists, people who are on the cutting edge of technology, people who work in logistics. There's been basically an entirely new warrior class created in Russia. And this warrior class is very different from the old guard who are, in many ways still kind of stuck in certain rigid Soviet paradigms. These people are 21st century. You've got a lot of Zoomers now in the Russian military, and they're quickly rising up in the ranks, and they're bringing their knowledge of technology, their fresh perspectives into the Russian military. And so the Russian military is far more lethal now than it was at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict.
Well, I have to say, Dimitri, considering it's Senator Lindsey Graham out there saying that making those remarks in regards to Russia's capabilities at the moment, that causes a lot of Americans to believe the opposite, which is what you're saying, because the level of trust that the American people have in Lindsey Graham is pretty low. And I do understand that we're going to be seeing more footage from the front lines very soon. We will bring that to our viewers as we, cover the conflict in its entirety and completely from both sides. Thank you so much, Dimitri Science, for joining us. Again, his podcast is the New Rules Podcast. If you're so inclined to go check it out for yourself. Thanks, Dimitri.
Thank you.
Are you looking for monthly income without the risk of stocks because you don't feel like maybe you're well versed enough in the stock market? Well, here's something you won't hear about on CNBC. There's a unique way to collect royalties directly from America's most productive oil fields. No exploring, drilling, or operational headaches required. You simply collect checks month after month. And the best part? You can get started with just $25 through any brokerage account. The Oxford Club's chief income strategist, Mark Lichtenfeld, breaks down what he believes is the #1 oil royalty play for 2025. Simply visit RobinsonOilBoom.com now for more information. That's RobinsonOilBoom.com. RobinsonOilBoom.com now for more information. That's RobinsonOilBoom.com. And what is some welcome news, I am sure, to the victims of the Biden regime's political warfare. The Gateway Pundit reports that, quote, Trump attorney Peter Tickton and Mark McCloskey have joined forces to seek compensation for the hundreds of American patriots who were persecuted and held hostage in prisons across the country in the wake of the protests at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, 2021. Peter Tickton and McCloskey point out that J6ers were unfairly targeted for political retribution. The article says, quote, for attempting to exercise their First Amendment rights to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance for what they believed was a stolen election. These Americans have been called traitors, domestic terrorists, and violent insurrectionists. For 4 years, they were hunted, persecuted, arrested, and imprisoned by their own government. Now, the innocent J6ers, after having been abused by a corrupt regime, are taking the fight to the corrupt system in the court. And joining us now to discuss further is investigative journalist Patricia Tolson. It's good to see you again, Patricia. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again.
We've talked so much on this show about the need for restorative justice for J6ers because it's not just that they were targeted, okay? They were imprisoned for many of them for years in pretrial detainment, meaning they lost their livelihoods, many lost their spouses, some became estranged from the children. Now they're out in the real world again. Many, I hear, cannot find adequate work. It's very difficult to find a job to support not just yourself, but if your family stayed, your family. It's just very difficult to get reacclimated to being free, right, and functioning in society again. They lost so much that, yes, I think there is a need for reparations. Can you explain to us the effort and how this would work?
It's not a class action lawsuit. It's not a group being represented. What Peter Tickton and Mark McCloskey are doing is facilitating individual lawsuits for the January 6th victims who were targeted by their own government for their political beliefs. And the way they're going about it is they have formulated a questionnaire. There's like 111 points. And the questionnaire helps them to figure out how to proceed from there. And questions are related to how they were personally treated, starting from when they were arrested, when SWAT teams showed up at their home and aimed firearms at them and their family, sometimes 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and hauled them out into the front yard in their underwear and zip ties and, little fireflies of gun sights dancing over their bodies, and sometimes with their own children. And it was, from the very beginning, a violation of their civil rights, their First Amendment rights, their Eighth Amendment rights. There's a long list of rights that were violated. And some of these people have a right to receive reparations.
Yeah, I think so. I know there's going to, if you're fighting it in the corrupt court system, though, it's hard to imagine that a court will go along with this. I mean, what do you think is the actual potential for getting these kind of damages awarded?
The thing is that the initial January 6 trials all took place in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. These cases will not necessarily be held in Washington, D.C. So there is more opportunity to have unbiased juries. And the juries, there was a survey taken of the jury pool for Washington, D.C., and it became completely apparent that the jury pool itself was extremely biased against January 6 defendants, so they never stood a chance. So this is another way to legally right the wrongs and correct the judicial approach to how January 6 victims were treated.
Yeah, if the cases or the trials don't take place or the lawsuits are not filed in the District of Columbia, it's definitely a much better chance for them. And I do remember there was multiple surveys. Remember, Patricia, you had the survey of potential jurors, of the people, but then you also had just the Google trends that one group analyzed of the District of Columbia, and the Google trends told you exactly how biased the jury pool was going to be. So they never stood a chance. No, they didn't. One thing they have gotten is a blanket pardon from Donald Trump, right? And we didn't know for sure that was going to happen. Even up to the 11th hour, there was talks of, pardons for some, but not for all, evaluating others later, going with what was going to be considered nonviolent defendants first. But then we had constantly highlighted how many people were charged with violent crimes that were not guilty of any violence, and it was verifiable they had never committed violence. But Donald Trump ultimately did what we thought was the right thing to do. But you're kind of on the inside. You know how this went about, why he ultimately chose a blanket pardon. Can you share some of that, what actually happened? I understand he got a memo, maybe a 120-point memo that helps him understand why a blanket pardon was best.
No, the 111-point document is the questionnaire for the January 6 prisoners. The impetus for Donald Trump to change his mind was discussions with Peter Tickton. Peter Tickton was adamant that there should be a blanket pardon because, as I said, from the very beginning, the whole process was illegal. The violations of their civil rights, the whole system was corrupt against the January. There was no justice there. So even like you were mentioning, the people that committed violence, well, assault with a deadly weapon could have been a water bottle. They were stretching it as far as they could to find reasons to imprison these people. And then they would coerce them into plea deals by threatening to charge them with obstruction. That charge carries a 20-year penalty. And I know of at least 4 January defendants who committed suicide. They were so terrified of what their government was doing to people that, can you imagine the fear of thinking that your best out is to take your own life? This is horrifying. It is horrifying that this government was allowed to do this. And I am determined to make sure that the truth gets out and that the whole topic of January 6th prisoners takes on a whole new meaning. America needs to learn what really happened to these people and what really happened on that day. It's like Peter Tickton always says, there was an insurrection on that day, but it was not Donald Trump's supporters. It was the United States government.
You're right. And look, here's my concern, Patricia, is, we've already lost 4 to suicide. That includes Matthew Perna, whose Aunt Jerry had been on the show and talked about that situation and death, and it's absolutely heartbreaking. But my concern is if these people aren't able to rebuild their lives, and if there's not some level of restoration for them, that we're going to see more people lost to suicide. And that's my concern. I love that they have somebody, a champion like Peter Tickton on their side. Peter's been on the show before, but one reason he has the president's ear, and I'll remind our audiences that Peter Tickton went to the same military academy as Donald Trump did when they were in their youth. And he even reported to him, because it was a military academy, to him while they're there. So the two have stayed close friends since those days. So it's wonderful that the J6ers have an advocate like Peter Tickton. And if you could tell us a little bit more about Mark McCloskey, this other attorney who's advocating for reparations, if you will.
Well, Mark McCloskey, people probably would recognize him by the photos. It was during the Black Lives Matter riots when he and his wife defiantly stood outside of their property during Black Lives Matter riot, and they were surrounding the property, and the two of them stood outside to defend their home and their lives. And then they were actually later prosecuted for that. And it is unbelievable that it's the rioters who are the victims and the people who are defending their own lives and their property are the ones that are arrested and fined and punished. And so Mark McCloskey understands full well what it is like when your political beliefs do not align with what the government prefers you to cling on to. And so he has become a very, very strong advocate of January 6th prisoners receiving justice. So he's teamed up with Peter Tickton, and he's helping to facilitate these pending lawsuits.
Well, I know those two gentlemen are excellent advocates to have by the side of J6ers. Keep us posted as these lawsuits, this effort moves forward, because we've been trying to keep in touch with the post J6 pardons, because as I said, I'm very concerned about people who are not able to rebuild, restore, or get reacclimated to society. We have to help them do that, because this was an atrocity committed against them by their own government. So it's part of we the people to help them with the restoration process.
One of the strangest things is reading the comments to the article. Some of the comments, a great deal of the comments, were they didn't feel comfortable with the use of the word reparations. And they preferred that I had used compensation. And all you need to do is pull out a thesaurus and find out that the two words are the same thing. But the thing is reparations, the definition of reparations is to financially compensate an individual for a wrong that was done to them. And I think somewhere along the line, the word reparations was co-opted by people who want to be financially compensated for something that never happened to them, and something that happened to someone 200 years ago. So the word reparation seems to have triggered a lot of people. And another comment was that the United States government did this. So why should the taxpayer be beholding and have to pay these reparations? Well, the United States government has few real responsibilities: national security, maintaining order and justice, and protecting its citizens. So the United States, if the United States government and the American people as taxpayers aren't going to stand up for these people, who is going to do that? And the reason why the United States government is being sued is because they have the capacity to make immediate restoration to these people. And their lives have been destroyed. They need help now. We don't need to run this around and run this around. They have already given up years of their lives. Some have given up their lives. And it's time to take care of them now.
You know, I understand how triggering the word reparations is for many people because, as you said, it's been misused over the last few decades, and it has a negative connotation that isn't actually accurate, perhaps, by the actual definition. But I understand probably why some people's knee-jerk reaction is that. I also understand the questions about the taxpayer, but look, here's my thing on that. If these people aren't made whole, if we don't right this wrong, it's very hard for us to move forward as a constitutional republic. And restoration is one way we're going to heal and preserve our republic. Now, you could also make the case that maybe Nancy Pelosi should be personally sued, right, for what she did on that day. And from what I understand, she made like 47% on her investments, her stock portfolio, last year, which makes Warren Buffett looks like he doesn't even know what he's doing because she's performing so much better than Warren Buffett. But that's perhaps another suggestion for another day. Thank you so much, Patricia Tolson. You can look out for the article in the Gateway Pundit at thegatewaypundit.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Emerald.
Well, our old friend Michael Shellenberger has gone in the span of 5 years from a nuclear energy expert to an expert in government censorship and disinformation to now the leading voice, supposedly, on UFO disclosure. But who is Michael Shellenberger really? This is a question where we here at The Absolute Truth have been asking for more than a year now. Writing on my Substack last year, I concluded that, quote, Michael Shellenberger is whatever you need him to be on any given day. He could be the governor of California, or an environmentalist, public relations executive, or a nuclear energy lobbyist, or a government censorship expert, or a professor of politics, or an award-winning journalist. He's a shapeshifter. Seems we're not alone in noticing Shellenberger's strangeness. Our other friend, Ashton Forbes, a real friend, mind you, tweeted this out recently, quote, the rise of Michael Shellenberger feels inorganic. He was boring on Joe Rogan. He had no business testifying to Congress about UFOs. He was gifted the Twitter files. Oh, and let the record show he followed me early in the MH370 investigation. I passed him the all evidence list. Then he unfollowed me and ghosted me. So he was given the biggest story in the history of the world by me and ignored it. Some journalists. Joining us now is Ashton Forbes. He tweets under the handle of @JustXAshton, @JustXAshton, and he is the world's leading investigator into the truth of the 2014 disappearance of Malaysian Airlines MH370. It's good to have you again, Ashton.
Thank you, Emerald, for having me on. And thank you for that, because I do think that eventually we'll come to realize the truth about that missing plane. And it was the United States government that's responsible.
I do find it very interesting, particularly when you said that you had gifted him. Like, Shellenberger gets gifted a lot of great stories, okay? It's interesting what he picks and chooses to cover and what he becomes an expert of. So I saw your tweet, okay, about gifting him all the evidence list of the MH370 flight. And he unfollowed you and ghosted you. You know, on that very same day that you tweeted that, a source of mine told me that he had been presented with evidence, huge evidence of election fraud, and he chose not to learn any more. He'd been offered it. He wasn't presented, but he was offered it. He wanted nothing to do with it. It could have been the biggest story, like you said. This is, again, another huge story, a live career-making story. I will give you the caveat. It might have been a conflict of interest considering he had been a former public relations person for Hugo Chavez. So this information might have been a little problematic for him. But then I thought, on that very same day, you tweeted this about having given him the evidence. You wanted a journalist to run with it, right, Ashton?
Yeah, and this is the part where if you look at the whole story of Michael Schellenberg, it is extremely sketchy. As you pointed out, just his past with like Hugo Chavez, and then his take on COVID as well, jumping in, trying to be the governor of California. All of it's really bizarre. And then he has Elon Musk come down with the Midas touch, boom, ordain him, which anything that Elon touches basically just turns to gold, and gave him the Twitter files. And we should be probably, even though the content of the Twitter files was great, I think we should be more skeptical about who Elon chose for that. Matt Taibbi, I got no problem with. Barry Weiss, kind of. And then Schellenberger, and then a few other relatively unknowns. And all they did was just find some dirt in the old emails and post it on the internet. The part that really started to bother me was after he goes on Joe Rogan and he commits the cardinal sin of just being boring as hell on Joe Rogan. You're going on Joe Rogan and you're talking about aliens and UFOs and you're going to be boring? If I go on Joe Rogan, I guarantee you the last thing it'll be is boring. And then for some reason, he's testifying to Congress in a UFO hearing because like somebody else told him information, but they don't want to testify directly. The thing is, in today's day and age, we have to be very cautious of people that are selected, ordained to pass us the truth, because the deep state people in the know, they realize that mainstream media is falling apart. So where are they going? They're going to alternative media and buying up whoever they can to influence the hearts and minds of the public. That's my rant.
I think you're right. Because, well, I know as far as the Twitter files go, he didn't write his own testimony for Congress. I know who did. But then when we go to the UFO disclosures, remember there was also another UFO investigative journalist, and there's, he's a bit controversial, but he had receipts saying that he initially had something that he'd given to Congresswoman Nancy Mace, and then they spun it as if Michael Schellenberger had, and he had questioned why that journalist and a personality's name is Jeremy Corbell. Here's what he said about Schellenberger. Listen.
Go ahead and I will do it. Enter into the congressional record this 12-page document that Michael Schellenberger brought today that describes the Immaculate Constellation government program.
I submitted those 12 pages. Michael Schellenberger did not.
So they chose Schellenberger, though they knew, Nancy Mace apparently knew it came from, or allegedly, according to Corbell, that it came directly from Corbell. So they wanted Schellenberger to be the person to put it out there. Why? Why choose them to be the voices when it was just like with the Twitter files? I mean, I'd been out there reporting on this for a long time, as had many other people. It didn't have to be me, right? As I mentioned in these Twitter files, but they didn't put that out there. I had to ask Matt Taibbi behind the scenes and get some of the information because they didn't actually report on it. Why choose people like Schellenberger?
Yeah, I'm just going to speculate, and I would say it's so that we don't get anything done. The point is to keep us incompetent, to keep us dumb, to make sure that we're never really figuring out the answer. And this actually segues back to Elon Musk and something he was saying recently, that he went on Joe Rogan and he's saying that, well, I don't think that the defense contractors have any, advanced technology, gravity manipulation. I would know. And he says, oh, I had a security clearance and I would know. That type of attitude, that type of behavior is the type that makes sure that we are never going to find out the truth about the type of technology that the United States government has. And I think that when you enable that type of attitude, it stunts the growth of humanity. And so you pick somebody like Schellenberger because he's not going to take the controversial cases like the MH370 case or the election fraud case. He's going to do the safe thing. And when he was asked in Congress in UFO hearing, he just said, I don't know. I have no idea. It's like, why are you even here then, guy? Oh, you're here to make sure that we don't have anybody who's relevant there. Meanwhile, Salvatore Pais, U.S. Navy engineer, is sending me letters begging me to post on my Twitter to Elon Musk a challenge to him. in response to that Joe Rogan interview. I'm just going to read part of it very quickly. Absolutely. Once again, Mr. Musk shows his extreme ignorance in his view of academic work. Case in point, the superforce. This is Salvatore Pais' paper, The Force of Unification. Gives a list to it. Equation 1 is extremely powerful. It shows that quantum gravity can be achieved, not necessarily by string theory or any of these other ideas that are out there. And it says that none of the physics journals will even publish his paper. He demands, or he says, Elon Musk, please review this and challenge its results. He's basically saying that this super force, this quantum gravity, is the nature of our reality all around us. He's speaking to 0-point energy in the ether and saying, Elon, we can do this, but we have to open our minds to it. That's the underlying text of where this is all going to in terms of media manipulation.
And you actually made a post to your ex explaining what's at play with this Pais Musk tiff. You said, quote, no question, the reason they're hiding UFO technology is because free energy, and it's a doomsday weapon. There are the national security reasons. There is technology infinitely more powerful than nukes in the hands of an elite group of people, and the physics that allows for it has been suppressed historically to hide it. Do you think there's any possibility at all that Musk would ever take Salvatore's offer up for a debate on the topic?
Stranger things have happened, but it is unusual how Musk has just completely ignored engaging with any of my content. So this is the big controversy, is that people get very upset about, they're sure that Elon is lying and that he knows and he's read in and he's just playing coy, versus I'm leaning more of like he actually is just kind of brainwashed and blue-pilled on this one specific avenue, even though he's quite open to, you know, some of the influences and stuff that we've seen in the media and during COVID, et cetera. And that's where I would want people to wake up a little bit, is that I don't know how to reach people, but one way might be, if you look around at the complexity of life on this planet, or even just ourselves, especially if you're somebody who believes more in terms of like intelligent design, it's like, do you really believe that through just evolution alone and just, I don't know, however many hundreds of thousands of years they claim it would take, that all of a sudden we just went from monkeys to people? I mean, the reason why I bring this up is that the universe is more magical than what we give it credit for. And that will open up the doorway to the next echelon of our civilization. We just have to open our minds to it.
Well, I'm Christian, so I definitely believe there's more to the universe than monkeys evolving. And we could get into that perhaps on another, we could debate a little bit. It sounds like, Ashton, you and I, me as a Christian and you as, you know, intelligent life out there, it could be very interesting. But I always love hearing your take. And I do think that you're probably so right about the energy, the 0-point energy. And I was just telling you a little bit, it's a conversation that is getting more attention, because even my 8-year-old, as I told you in the break, had asked me about free energy and 0-point energy. And so I did have to ask him, I said, you know, I was trying to train him the way to think, you know, why bring it up now? Seems like, okay, I want to ask you, do you think that, and this will be my final question, is it that they know people like you are out there talking about it, and there's more people listening and believing that we already have this technology? Or is it that I kind of feel like they're ready to let the cat out of the bag, because we can't really fuel artificial intelligence with our current energy systems infrastructure that we have without free energy, right? We're talking about annexing like Canada and Greenland to just fuel a bit of it, but that's still not enough. So is it that they have to introduce it to us so they can go forward with their AI? We may be going way off in the field there. I don't know.
Definitely agree. Annex Canada. Let's make it happen. But no, you actually bring up a great point, which is that the energy demands are almost making it mandatory, especially with the huge energy demands of AI. Plus, it's just getting really hard to keep lying to people. A lot of people are independently figuring it out. And people are figuring out that 0-point energy isn't just some sci-fi terminology that's thrown around in the movies. It's actually a real concept. And when you start to really challenge the mainstream academics on it, they don't have a response. They actually don't have a way to debunk it, because it's just proven scientific fact. And there are just edge cases where academia can't really explain the phenomenon that we see out there. So I'm glad that your son's looking into it. What I would say is this, as a final thought, is that it is a national security issue because of the destructive capability of unlimited energy. And we have to figure out some way where we can make sure that we're going to be safe. Because if we don't, then we're not going to last very long. And I want your son to grow up in a nice world.
Me too. Me too. That's why I do what I do, and I appreciate your efforts as well. Thank you so much, Ashton Forrest. Again, you can follow him on X, Just X Ashton, Just X Ashton. He is not boring like Michael Schellenberger, and he would be great on Joe Rogan. So we hope that happens. Thanks, Ashton.
Thank you.
Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona will join us tomorrow for lots of important topics. You won't want to miss that, and that's the absolute truth. See you tomorrow.